SOS, Cuba Libre. Tonight, Bienvenido is joined by Mercedes Schlapp and Giancarlo Sopo to talk about what's happening right now in Cuba and how we can help.
No más mentira, mi pueblo pide libertad, no más doctrina. Ya no gritemos patria o muerte, sino patria y vida. Y empezar a construir lo que soñamos, lo que destruyeron con su mano.
Giancarlo, you've been very active on social media, shining a light on the human rights, the atrocities of communism happening right now in Cuba. Can you explain what is going on in Cuba right now for the rest of the freedom-loving world to hear?
What's happening is that 11 million people on the island are fed up with 62 years of living under communism, under economic misery, under no freedom, under a lack of civil liberties, and no rights to live their lives in the way that they would like. So people are fed up, and they're no longer afraid of this like tin pot dictatorship just 90 miles off of our shores. They're demanding change. They want the communist regime to go. They're not asking for, like coexistence. They're saying, you guys need to get out of here. You've ruined this country. You've ruined our lives, and we live in misery because of you. Every single one of you need to need to leave.
This is, what's been happening in Cuba is near and dear to both of you as Cuban Americans. Maybe if you could share your story, your family's story, and how they escaped communism and how you've dedicated your life to freedom here in America.
Thank you, John, and it's great to be on the program with Giancarlo, who was one of the brain trust when it came to the incredible work we did on Hispanic outreach on the Trump campaign. But to your point, John, yes, I mean, my story, my family's story is one of many of the Cuban stories of having to flee a communist regime, being separated, and really having to start over again in this great country of America. My dad, back when he was in his late 20s, and that was in the early, actually late 1960s, he was really flourishing as a businessman. And when the Castro regime came into power and started really cracking down on businesses and on the Cuban people, my father said, this is just horrible and it's not going to work. And he decided to fight back against the Cuban regime. As sadly, since he was a counter-revolutionary, he joined a group. They did find them. They threw them into jail. Some of his friends were executed, and many of them served prison terms up to 20 years in jail. My dad was sentenced to 13 years. He ended up serving 6 years in jail as a political prisoner. And it really took him a long time to talk about the torture, the solitary confinements for months at a time, what the Cuban military and the communist regime did to these political prisoners. And what we're seeing right now is the fact that you have hundreds of Cubans who have disappeared. We have no idea where they are. You're seeing videos of young girls, their hair being pulled by the communist military. You're seeing people this military going straight into people's homes and shooting them point blank. This is horrific what we're watching in Cuba. And my question is, where is Joe Biden? Where is the U.S. leadership to stop this bloodbath that's happening in Cuba in a moment of desperation for the Cuban people who are crying for freedom?
Mercy, you called out for pressure on President Biden. Absolutely agree. But what can we do as well as non-elected people, just seeing what's going on?
Yeah, so I was really moved by my dear friend Mercedes Schlapp's story and what happened to her dad. Similar things happened in my family. My abuelo, who I never met, was thrown in jail. He died. My grandmother was made a widow in 1959, and she never remarried again for the rest of her life. So those stories really hit close to home. In terms of what we should be doing, I think we need to be much more aggressive in supporting the dissidents on the island. We need to be much more aggressive in amplifying the voices of these artists who, let's be clear, they're not traditional political dissidents. A lot of these are just like, a lot of these are kids with YouTube channels. They're influencers. They're painters. They're creatives. And these are the people who they're shooting in the streets, who they're beating with clubs, who are. We still don't know where many of them are. They've just been thrown in some jail somewhere. Their mothers are looking for them. So these are the people, and they're completely unarmed too, because the Cuban people have no weapons. The Castro regime took away Cubans' guns when it came into power. So they're completely defenseless. And so we need to be far more aggressive in amplifying their voices and making sure that the rest of the world knows that these Cubans are missing, for instance, in facilitating internet access to Cubans, because the communist regime is shutting down access to social media sites. So we should be looking at everything. We should be looking at satellite. We should also be looking at proxies and at VPNs that the Cubans on the island can use to circumvent the government's censorship. So there's a lot more that we could be doing, but I feel like Joe Biden and his administration were asleep at the wheel. They said recently that Cuba wasn't really a priority for them, and it shows. There's been no multilateral pressure on this regime. If anything, you've had some series of statements from the Biden White House and administration that have like ranged from, okay, yeah, this is an okay statement, to just being god awful. So we're sending a lot of mixed messages. We need to deal with communists in a very clear and a very strong way. We cannot send mixed messages or go back to any policies of weakness. We need to be strong.
So true. So true. Mercy, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think we've got the wrong president right now, because all we get from President Biden is pure weakness when it comes to foreign policy. In fact, you've seen the White House press secretary go from calling this a government mismanagement. Let's make this very clear. This is communism. This is a dictatorship. This is oppression of people's rights. And so it just shows how weak the Biden administration has been so far. In fact, when they asked the White House press secretary, is President Biden going to address this issue? Quote, she responds, not at this time. So this is what we're dealing with. I don't think there's enough pressure on President Biden to really make significant changes. In fact, the pressure that you're seeing from the left is the fact that when you have Black Lives Matter wanting to get rid of blaming this whole issue of what's happening in Cuba to the U.S. trade embargo without even mentioning the Cuban communist regime, it shows who the president may be listening to, which is the fact that these leftists really believe that it's because of the trade embargo that the Cuban people are where they are. Well, let me make this very clear. The Cuban people are where they are with no rights, oppressed because of the Cuban communist regime that has been in power for over 60 years, where they make sure that all the money that they get from China and Russia and Venezuela and the European Union, all that money goes straight into the hands of the Cuban military, the intelligentsia, and leadership. The Cuban people do not benefit from any of the trade that comes from these other countries. So that is the biggest myth that we have to dispel. And to the other point here is the fact that this is not just about COVID shortage or food shortage. It is much more than that. This democratic movement has been growing. This democracy movement has been growing for quite some time in Cuba, and they found an opening and they decided to take action despite the fact that they knew that the biggest consequences that they might face is death.
Yeah,
right.
One of the things that the Cuban regime has been very effective at is propaganda internally, because they're able to control the entire flow of information. And they've convinced Cubans, because you meet a lot of them. I'm sure Mercy knows a lot of them also in Miami, who, when they come here, they're still under the impression that Cuba has this great healthcare system because the government convinced them of that. But
President Obama actually said that too, that they have a great healthcare. And
yeah, so like what's happened is that Cubans are seeing that myth just evaporate before their eyes. They were already used to, like, if they had to go to the hospital, they'd have to bring sheets and pillows and maybe even a mattress. But now they're seeing images of people showing up at hospitals. There are no syringes. There are no oxygen tanks. The rest of the world is getting over COVID. but now they have no way to deal with this crisis. So their entire healthcare system is collapsing. The myth that Cuba has this great healthcare system is a canard. And that's very apparent to these Cubans. So in some ways, I think it is like a straw that broke the camel's back. But let's be clear, that camel is carrying a lot of straws. And you don't see anybody on the streets chanting, we want vaccines. What they're saying is Libertad, liberty, and abajo la dictadura, down with the dictatorship.
So true. And if you've been following this, in February, this song comes out, it goes viral, Patria y Vida, right? Taking a play on homeland and death, but making it homeland and life. Patria y Vida is now all over social media. We at Bienvenido have amplified that message and that song. People are being imprisoned right now in Cuba for playing that song. You don't see it because they're canceling the internet. Communism is canceling their freedoms. And it's another example of the oppression under communism, under socialism that we all talked about across the country when campaigning for President Trump all over the United States. I want to close with this. I'd like you all to share a message in Spanish with the Cubans listening, with freedom-loving people all over the world. What should we share at this moment?
Mercy, you can go first.
Bueno, para mis amigos y amigas, los que están peleando todos los días en Cuba para la libertad, este es el momento y hay que estar muy fuerte, hay que unirnos en oración y saber que juntos podemos lograr este gran sueño que hemos pedido por tantos años. Y estamos con ustedes, no los vamos a abandonar y nada más podemos pedir que algún día vamos a ver una Cuba libre y va a ser por las acciones que ustedes han tomado, han sacrificado para poder lograr este gran sueño de una Cuba libre.
De mi parte, lo que quisiera decir es que para mí los cubanos son las personas más capaces, más hermosas del mundo. Y lo sé en mi caso porque mis padres son cubanos y estoy casado con una cubana de santiaguera de la isla. Entonces, para mí Cuba es muy especial y para muchos cubanos americanos también. Y lo que queremos que ustedes sepan es que estamos con ustedes, que los vemos, estamos muy unidos, comprometidos con ustedes por su causa. Y nosotros sabemos que con estos hombres y mujeres muy valientes que están marchando en las calles de La Habana, Palma Soriano, Matanzas y el resto del país, que Cuba tendrá un futuro más próspero y mucho más bonito gracias a ustedes, y que Dios los acompañe y que sepan que siempre pueden contar con nosotros, con la comunidad cubano-americana y con aliados como Mercedes y como su servidor.
Pues muy amable, que Dios les bendiga, y thank you so much for sharing your voice here tonight. Mercedes Schlapp, Giancarlo Sopo, bien queridos de Bienvenido, bien queridos de mi parte, que viva Cuba libre. Que tengan buena noche. Gracias.
Gracias.